What's up guys, Intelitech Studios here, and today we're going to be doing the full in-depth review of the Shark Navigator Swivel Pro and Swivel Deluxe. Now, both of these units are pretty much at this moment Shark's entry-level vacuum in their entire lineup, and you can find it from a vast range of prices from anywhere from around $100 to upwards of $200. And I will immediately say off the bat, do not spend more than $100 in change for this machine, because Walmart right now sells this machine for about $110. Don't pay any more than that. I will say that immediately off the bat. If you want a Shark that's of this style and you actually don't necessarily need the extended capacity, I would recommend instead using that money to get a refurbished Navigator Liftaway NV352, which these you can find refurbished for around $100, and you can find them brand new for $150. And depending on the deals, sometimes you can even find similar units to this for, again, around $100 brand new. So, getting that right off the bat, if you're in the store and you're trying to decide between the two of these, you've already decided you want a Shark, and you've already decided that you only have about $100 in change to spend. In most situations, I will recommend the NV352, NV351 Navigator Liftaway over this Navigator Swivel Pro, because they have pretty much all the same features. The liftaway gains the liftaway portion, and it has better quality tools, attachments, better parts availability, better filtration, and it has less capacity. So that's the main differences right there, right off the bat between these two units. If you're trying to decide between these two, there's your Cliff Notes answer. If you absolutely need the extended capacity, sure, get this. Otherwise, get this. Now, if you are not dead set on a Shark and you are trying to decide between these and other machines in similar price ranges, we'll discuss that as the video goes on. So, this Navigator Swivel Pro / Swivel Deluxe, this is, like I mentioned before, pretty much Shark's entry-level machine. Now, there is also the Navigator Lite, which is similar to this, but it's much smaller, much more compact. I will be reviewing that at a later date, although I consider this to be the most entry-level model because that Navigator Lite is always more expensive than this, at least from where I usually see it. So it kind of just seems like a downgrade and an unnecessary one. But I will review that at a later date and give my thoughts on that. But as far as full-size Sharks, this is pretty much the entry level. So what do you get for your around $110? Well, starting off, you get the main machine here. Now, for those of you that have been with Shark for a while, you may recognize this as the original Shark Navigator upright. And it is pretty much very similar to that. The main differences are you gain the swivel neck, obviously if you're referring to the swivel model. Now, the only model that Shark sold without a swivel neck was a Big Lots exclusive for a while, at least to my knowledge. That was in gold color. That was the Shark Navigator Deluxe. It wasn't the swivel, it was the normal Deluxe. And I do have a review of that on my channel as well. That one was a bit more quick, but that model has since been discontinued by Big Lots. I have not seen that in stock at any local Big Lotses, so I'm pretty sure Shark now only sells machines with the swivel neck other than the aforementioned light model. So, comparing this to the original Navigator, depending on which store you get, the handle will be different, although most of these have this handle. Some of them have the handle of the original Navigator. The Deluxe model that I just mentioned has a different handle. Out of all those handles, personally, this one is my favorite. It's the most comfortable. It feels nice. It helps you kind of weight the machine pretty well. It makes it easy to push and pull. The swivel neck is very easy to articulate, and I actually like this handle better than these other three Sharks I'm comparing it to. The NV352, I don't like this handle as much. Yes, it does double as a cleaning wand, and that's a nice feature, but the actual handle itself doesn't seem very well designed. Oftentimes, whenever I'm using it as a wand, I just hold it right here, and when I'm using it as a handle, it feels a bit heavier in the hand. And then comparing it to the Apex, which is the top-of-the-line Shark, the actual machine itself is much heavier, so even if the handle is better designed, which I think it is, it kind of is offset by the entire machine weighing more, and this little fabric underneath the handle tends to wear out and peel over time, especially if you happen to have sweaty hands while you're vacuuming, which will be exacerbated by the weight on this unit. So I do like the handle on this particular machine. And that is one of the differences that you will find with that. One of the other differences, well, I just demonstrated it, the swivel neck. Now, depending on which model you get, this base will look different. Some of them will have bases that look like this, and some of them will have bases that look like this with that clear window up front. Now, I did have a black one of these that looked very similar to this, only it had, the main difference is that it had the base that was more akin to the style of that base, and it had a HEPA filter up front. So most of these newer units have a HEPA filter up front, although unlike the purple one, it's not advertised as a sealed system, but still has HEPA filter up front. This one is the older model that just has your basic pad exhaust filter. Basically, the main difference there is that obviously the one with the larger filter will have better filtration because it's an actual HEPA media material. It's an actual pleated filter. Both of these filters don't wash out very well, so while you can wash either of those versions of the post-motor filter, they don't wash out very well. This one retains its color, as you can see, or I should say it retains its staining, so this does not wash out. Doesn't matter how many times you wash this. The carbon dust on this is not going to get out of it. Carbon dust does not wash out of filters very well. This filter, when it gets dirty, I would say about every year replace it. Now, as far as the filter in the dust cup, one other difference between this and the original Navigator is that the original Navigator had a cyclone pack up here that had about 20 cyclones. This one does not. This has the more modern Shark design trend where you simply release the canister, which this particular model, there's a silver button right here. You push that and you can release the canister. And there's simply a two-piece filter right underneath here. So depending on your model, sometimes this will be a cone-shaped filter like this, where it's multiple pieces, where you pull this out and you have a little pad underneath and you have it in a little cage and you can pull this filter off of this piece and wash all this. And then some other models, you know, this will just essentially go down a bit further and you'll have two pad filters, very similar to how it is on that purple one. So depending on your unit, the filters are different. So keep in mind, not every swivel Navigator filters are the same. Some of them are different, but the actual process as far as washing these out is the same. Both this lower piece and this upper filter are washable, and as long as you let them dry for at least 24 to 48 hours before you put them back in, they'll be just fine. Although keep in mind that if you do wash these tend to get dirty pretty quickly. Although the nice thing is that since it's directly underneath the bin, every time you pull off the bin to empty it, you can visually inspect the filter and see whenever it's dirty that you should, whenever you should clean it. Now, right here, Shark recommends to clean these filters every 3 months, but in my experience, it generally depends on your usage. It's very hard to actually give like a hard line date as far as how often you need to clean the filters because people's usages are different. You may use the vacuum less. You may have a smaller area. You may have more fine dust than most people, depending on where you live. So just check this filter. And the thing is, a lot of these filters will start out white. Once you actually wash them, they're going to stay like a stained yellow color, but you'll still be able to see whenever they actually get stained with dirt. You can tell this one has a little bit of discoloring right there from dust, but it's very minor. Once this whole thing gets pretty dusty, you want to clean it because otherwise you can lose efficiency. You can starve the motor for air, and that would not be good for the overall health of your vacuum. So this dustbin opens up from both sides. Whenever you do empty it, you want to make sure this little screen is completely free of debris. Make sure there's no hair or any dryer sheets or anything wrapped around this, otherwise that will mess up your airflow. Make sure that this latches in when you empty it from the bottom. Same story. Make sure that this latch actually latches back in place. And like every bagless vacuum, I recommend whenever you empty this, empty it outside and take a damp cloth or a disinfecting wipe and wipe it around the perimeter of the outside of the bin, as well as on the inside bin flaps and on the seals. That'll help preserve the life of the seals and also make sure not any dust gets externally on this, because if you have dust that sits on the external body of this, whenever you turn the vacuum on, that gets blown up by the exhaust and blown back into your air. So even if it's a sealed system, you can still get dust escaping into the air due to the way that you empty this. That's just something that you have to deal with bagless vacuums. So just keep that in mind. So as far as that's pretty much all of the filter maintenance that you would have to deal with. The other thing is the brush roll. So I think, okay, I kind of went off on a tangent with the filters, but yes, that's the main difference between this and the original Navigators. One other thing is this brush roll. So these brush rolls do love to get stained, as you can see. Generally, since this runs on a 2-motor system, there is a separate motor in this base that powers the brush roll. That means you can easily shut the brush on and off. The brush automatically shuts off whenever you put the vacuum in the upright position. So generally speaking, if your brush for some reason is not turning, even with it in the on position and reclined back for carpet vacuuming with the head down like this, then you may want to check your belt. You want to make sure there's nothing jammed in the brush roll. You want to make sure that it's entirely clear of hair. As you can see, there's a little line right here where you can run a box cutter or something right there to cut any debris off the brush roll and pull that out. You can tell some like stuff from a chew toy did get caught in the bristles and all that kind of stuff. The bristles, the actual brush is a light color too, so it really likes to discolor and look pretty ugly. So that's unfortunate, but that's just something you got to deal with. Also, keep track of these wheels. Sometimes these wheels like to seize up. As you can tell, this one's actually seized up. I didn't even notice that. Good thing I checked that. And this one's fine. You can always take some Tri-Flow or some oil and put it in these wheels. Make sure they're spinning freely. Otherwise, they could scratch your floors, even though they are rubber coated. Main wheels on the back are also rubber coated, so they shouldn't have any issues of scratching your floors. But again, you always want to be careful with that. There are little gates up front to help it with large debris. Large debris pickup on this thing is pretty okay. It's not as good as the more expensive dual clean systems, but it still does a pretty good job whenever it's in the straight suction mode. That is one advantage of this having a narrow head, is that while the narrow head does mean that if you have a larger house, you will have to cover more surface area and take more passes to vacuum. That does also mean that each individual pass will have more power to it because the suction is more concentrated, and that's the same story with bare floor pickup as well. Now, I don't like the fact that the suction is off-center, but there are some newer models that are a bit more expensive that do address that issue. So if that is something you're concerned about, there are a few other models like the Navigator 0M, lift-away speed, and there's even actually a non-lift-away 0M model now that I actually forgot about. Actually, there's a few new machines in Shark's lineup that have kind of addressed some of the issues of this machine and might even replace it at some point in the lineup. But for now, this is still offered. Although it's not offered on Shark's website, it is offered on Walmart's website, Big Lots, Target, stuff like that. So you can still find this machine in many different places. And obviously, there's a huge market of these secondhand, so you can still find these. So one of the other things to mention is the cord. So this has a 25-foot cord, which honestly, for the price, any vacuum that's over $100, in my opinion, should have a 30-foot cord. That's my opinion. This has a 25-foot cord, so it's not great, but it's not horrible either. It's not like some of the cheaper machines that have, 18, 20, 22-foot cords. This is a 25-foot cord. For most homes, that should be okay, especially if you have an abundance of outlets, so that way even if you have to unplug and replug, you can still do that. Obviously, this machine uses about 10 amps of energy, so it's not really recommended to use an extension cord. But based on experience with using an extension cord with my Apex, if you need to use one in a pinch, it's not too big of a deal. Now, as far as using this cord, as you can see, the cord comes out right back here. There is a upper cord hook which you can twist to quickly release the cord. And there is also a cord hook up here to hold the cord out of the way. And that works pretty well. I've seen a lot of vacuums where the cord will actually pop out of the cord hook very easily. Thankfully, I've not had that issue with this particular machine. So, in fact, we can actually release the cord right now. Easily pull the whole cable right off. Set that aside. And I always like to twist it back up. Lower cord hook is fixed. Does not actually move. So that is one thing. There is also a molded clip on the cord to easily clip it to the cable, which is nice. It's not reversed like it is on some other machines. So the way you plug it in is the way you're supposed to. And there's some marking identification on the plug itself, as well as on the actual prongs. Give you some information there. So if we look at this particular model, my particular example is a NV46. So Shark doesn't put any real serial date information on these machines. But yeah, so we can see. One thing I do like about this is I did mention that cord clip. It holds the cord nicely, so that way it keeps it out of the way, but it's not like some vacuums where it has a death grip on the cord and pulling the cord out actually puts damage in the cord. That's not the case with this machine. You can easily pull the cord out and it's not damaged whatsoever. It's not scratched up, it's not kinked. Doing that long term is not going to mess up your cord to the point where you need to replace it. So that's one thing that is nice about this machine. So that is that. Now regarding the hose and the attachments. So this machine usually comes with two attachments. There's a dusting brush right here, which the dusting brush looks like this. Looks exactly like this. Goes right there. Pretty self-explanatory. And there's also a crevice tool. Unfortunately, the crevice tool is very short and stubby. You can tell by the actual caddy there. Now, the crevice tool from these NV352s will fit on the end of the hose, so you can replace the crevice tool, but it's not going to actually fit on the machine. As you can see, it's not actually going to fit in there. And Shark doesn't sell the actual crevice tools. Honestly, they don't sell crevice tools for either of these machines, but you can at least find a lot of these ones secondhand. You can't find any of these crevice tools, and trust me, I've looked. So if you lose your crevice tool, you're kind of SOL, and that's not great, especially when, well, the crevice tool is pretty important. And then at that point, all you have is your dusting brush. Most of the time, because those crevice tools always get lost because people forget they're there, and because of the fact that this caddy isn't all that strong at keeping this here, it gets knocked off. Most of the ones I find of these secondhand are missing their attachments, whereas with this model, the attachments are on an actual separate mount, so they're a little bit easier to keep track of, even if, yes, a lot of people will just end up losing the entire mount and all the attachments with it. And then, of course, there's newer Sharks where it actually mounts onto the pod itself. So this one does not have that. The brush attachment is pretty good as far as, you know, dusting and all that, because it's a good amount of softness for dusting, but it's also a stiff enough bristle to where you can use it as an upholstery tool, which is obviously good because on this machine it only comes with the two, so your dusting brush is going to also have to be an upholstery tool, although you can buy a turbo brush separately. But this tool is okay, but I honestly wish that the bristles were a bit longer and perhaps a bit stiffer, but it does okay. It has a swiveling joint too, so you can swivel it whichever direction you want for optimal cleaning. That's one thing that I do like about it. But I will admit, I don't like that crevice tool. I have used one before, I just don't have one to show you on video, unfortunately. But that is one thing, is that is the crevice tool. Now, regarding the hose itself, the hose pulls off right here. Just kind of attaches to the side, very similar to like a Hoover or a Bissell. But it does have the added advantage of whenever you put this thing in upright mode, whether it's in the carpet or the bare floor mode, it will shut off the brush roll, so you don't have to worry about it damaging anything that you set it on as in regards to the brush turning. You do have a wand built in. It's very similar to the wand on the lift away, only there's no handle on it, which honestly I actually prefer, because I don't like the handle on that. And one of my complaints with the NV352 is the fact that you can't use it without the handle. You have to have the big handle on it. You can't just grab the hose like this and use an attachment. That is something that I actually do like about this machine, is that the hose is a lot more straightforward. You have a basic wand, and you can take off the wand. In fact, I'll demonstrate that right now. You can take off the wand if you don't put it on there too tightly like I did. And if you do take off the wand, you can attach an attachment directly to the end of the hose like this. You can see where the seam is right there. And then while you're doing that, you can actually store the wand on the machine, which that's a nice feature. You can do it on that one too, but that's something that like a lot of Dysons, for example, don't really let you do. So there is that. There's also a suction control right here, another feature that a lot of Dysons don't have, unfortunately. And this, you can see there's this little lever right here. You can see it's fully sealed now. And if I want to reduce the suction, either if I'm using an upright mode with it stocked and I want to vacuum perhaps a delicate carpet or delicate rug, or if I'm vacuuming drapes or something like that where I don't want to have a bunch of suction, because this thing normally does have a good amount of suction, then I can simply push this and then open up this valve right here that lets the suction bleed out the side while you're cleaning, and that helps the suction from actually clamping down on it and not being able to effectively clean it, and as a result kicking in the suction relief valve inside the machine that is there to prevent damage to the motor. So that's one thing that's really nice. However, when you are wanting to actually deep clean carpets, just make sure that to actually move the selection back to where this is covered. So pretty self-explanatory, just something you should keep in mind. Also, when you put this wand back, please don't be one of those people that vacuums like this. Actually take the hose and put it back on the hook like it should be. Now, in regards to this lower hook is here to essentially anchor the hose. So when you're doing something up high, you're not actually yanking the vacuum over, because this vacuum is very narrow. It's very easy for this machine to tip over because the weight is not very evenly distributed, and there's not a very large base to actually brace this thing and keep it from falling over. It's very narrow. It's very easy for this thing to get very easily pulled over. So that's why this little clip is here. You can take the hose out of the clip to get some of your reach back, which is very useful if you're trying to reach up high, but if you're trying to reach down low, you're likely going to end up tipping the machine over, like in that case where it almost hit me with itself. In that case, you're going to want to anchor the hose in this little clip right here. It does kind of suck because it means you lose some length of your hose, but the option is there, and it does mean that instead of the hose simply looping around here and you having barely any hose, it loops all the way down here, and while your OCD may not like that because it's not super even, it means you have a lot longer of a hose. So there is that. One thing I will complain about, that I've had a lot of problems with these sharks, is that the build quality on some of these clips are very, very poor. As you can see right here, it says squeeze tabs to remove hose. One of the actual tabs, in fact both these tabs actually, are a very thin plastic that's supposed to hold this tab on. You can see it is on this side. It's a very thin tab though, and on this side you can see it's broken, which is not very good because it means that the second this other tab breaks, this will not stay on, and you'll have to replace this piece, and this piece is not very easy to replace without causing damage to the housing. So that is one thing to keep in mind. One thing that I like about the NV352 is that you don't have the constant pressure on the hose where you're pulling it down while you're cleaning, or even just due to gravity, and as a result that breaks these over time. Especially these parts are not designed to have a good amount of longevity. Same story with these clips here. You want to make sure that these actually snap back in place, because these will wear out and you'll have to actually push them on to their little levers, or to their little divots that they're supposed to slide onto. Otherwise, it will not stay on. There are a lot of little pieces of this machine, a lot of little clips that can wear out and break, and I've seen that happen on a lot of these machines in the wild. So keep that in mind. These machines are not very sturdy. They're not commercially rated. While they can last, and definitely do sometimes last, upwards of 5-10 years if taken care of, you may still have to deal with broken parts. And another thing I need to complain about with this machine is dry rotting, because the hoses on these love to dry rot. Well, now, what do I mean by that? That basically means that these hoses, for whatever reason, and it's even worse depending on your climate, will actually start to develop holes in the hose. Now, you'll kind of notice this whenever your hose starts to get really stiff and not be as flexible as it used to, and there's a lot of dirt caked on the inside of it. And that's not even like to the fault of the user. That's just kind of, how it goes. And it's one of those big problems. Now, if that happens on one of these lower hoses, it's not a big deal, because these lower hoses are only like $10 to replace. But these main hoses on either this model or on the liftaway especially are generally a lot more expensive. These can be upwards of $30-$40 to replace a hose. And when you only spend $100 on the machine, that can seem like a lot of money. Now, granted, it's not like you're going to have these issues out of the box, but if you're using the machine constantly, and especially if you're trying to use it in a commercial environment, these hoses are going to split over time, and it's going to be one of the weak points on the vacuum. And that's definitely a knock on a lot of these sharks. Now, a lot of the newer ones, it seems they've tried to address those issues, although since there's still new models, like the Apex, for example, time will tell if those actually do hold up better than these old hoses. I'm confident that they will at least be better, if not still perfect, or if not ideal. But that's a big issue with these early Navigators, is that these hoses are very poor quality. They love to split. They love to dry rot. They do not like to age well. And if you're rough with these machines, or honestly, even if it's just luck of the draw and you happen to get one that deteriorates very quickly, you'll likely have to replace these hoses. Now, one thing I will say is that, unlike a lot of Bissells and Hoovers, you won't have to replace belts or anything like that. But, replacing a $40 hose every 2 years potentially would probably be more expensive, to say the least, than replacing a $5 belt, or even, if you think about it, a $2.50 belt, since they're usually sold in packs of 2 for $5, and replacing that belt every 6 months or to a year. So, that is one of those things where it potentially could be an issue. I've seen it happen on a lot of these machines, and depending on how long you use this thing, it very well may become an issue. And I've seen a lot of people where they'll finally upgrade their sharks because the hoses finally split on theirs after 5-10 years, and where that was just kind of the weak point of the machine. So the hoses on these are weak points. They love to split. These connectors love to crack. Keep that in mind. That part of the machine is not built all that well, so that is unfortunately a weak point. So if you're concerned with longevity, please keep that in mind. Shark is not very good at providing replacement parts, and you can kind of get around that with this machine because this machine's been on the market for so long and it's been so overwhelmingly popular that aftermarket parts are flooded on the internet. This machine, not as much. In fact, the lower hoses that you find for these are actually designed for this model, but they are still the same size. They do still fit on. Now, if you have an older Navigator where these aren't actual clips and it's screwed in, I did make a video on how to replace that, so that's a little bit more complicated. It can be done, but it's a lot more of a hassle. So, that is one thing, is that longevity is a concern on this. Obviously, you have the better longevity of having a serpentine lifetime belt. You don't have to worry about replacing the belt. If the brush roll jams, there's a nice little light right here. It lights up green when the brush roll is working properly, and it lights up red whenever there is a jam. If you do jam this, just pull the obstruction out, turn the vacuum off, turn it back on, and you should be good to go, assuming it actually is clear of the jam. So that is one thing that is nice. You're not going to break a belt if you suck up a sock, but another thing you have to keep in mind is that it is bagless, so you have to maintain the filters a lot more often than a bagged machine. And yeah, this hose is definitely going to be a potential problem down the road. Now, one thing that I did mention is the 3-position switch. So this is pretty self-explanatory. You've got a 0, that's off, 1, that's bare floor, 2, that's carpet. And again, the carpet mode, even if it's in carpet mode, the brush will not turn unless you actually recline the vacuum back to start vacuuming. So, with that being said, I think I mentioned almost everything there is to mention about this machine, so we're going to go ahead and give it a quick run. So one thing to note is that I did, as you can see, like very haphazardly vacuum with this. You're not obviously supposed to vacuum your floor that slow. It does feel to me like the brush roll on this is actually a bit more aggressive than the highest end Apex, which is kind of interesting because I literally just vacuumed this carpet with the Apex, and we can see that the amount of like fine dust and grit and hair that this machine got, that the Apex left behind, is honestly kind of kind of interesting. I did not expect that. I logically expected that there would not be much left behind after the $400 vacuum was very meticulously and slowly vacuuming the carpet, versus this one that just vacuumed this small area, not even the whole living room, and very haphazardly. So while the performance of this machine, I will say, is not as good as far as deep cleaning carpets as other machines from the likes of Hoover and Bissell, including some other machines that are even certified by the Carpet and Rug Institute, that I'd be a little bit more confident as far as running them on your carpets. Something like the Hoover Tempo, the Hoover T-Series machines, which can be found in a similar price range as this, which those I'll link in the description as well. Have a lot of the same features as this, but have bags and are a lot easier to maintain. This certainly doesn't unimpress me. This is definitely something where, that's the kind of thing where, let's see if I want to knock all this debris down here, because I'm literally about to sell this in about 30 minutes, so that sucks. Now this is all dusty again. But yeah, so crap, she's messaging me saying that she's at the destination. So anyways, we can dump this out, and I can see, yeah, so that got a good amount of stuff. The Apex left behind. I'm honestly pretty impressed with that. But yeah, so that's the Navigator Swivel. I think that's pretty much everything I can say about this. I will have links in the description for this machine and other vacuums that I recommend. Anyways, if I missed anything, my apologies. I didn't sleep at all last night, so if I sound a little bit off the wall, that's why. I'm running on a bit too much caffeine. I probably should take a break before my heart explodes out of my chest. But anyways, this is Intelitech Studios signing out. I'll see you guys in the next video. Hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one. Peace.